Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Buncombe County Commission briefing meeting. Call the meeting to order. Um, Commissioners, are there any other items other than those that are published that you would like to add to our agenda for our briefing meeting? All right, great. Then we'll use this as our agenda for the meeting. The first item up is the microtransit test study.
Thank you, and good afternoon. One moment, and there we go. All right. Thank you very much. This has been a conversation that began over the summer, and happy to get this moving a little bit forward. Some of you may recognize this image. This was shared with some of you, I believe, by Julie White, the Deputy Secretary of Transportation for NCDOT. This showcases how microtransit is a growing interest throughout North Carolina. Several places in the state are exploring microtransit as an option or alternative to their existing transit systems. And Buncombe County joins them in their initial exploration and interest. NCDOT's Integrated Mobility Division works with public transportation systems across the state, as well as with the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State. We have worked with both of these groups. We work with IMD every week for the facilitation of elements related to mountain mobility. And we've had the pleasure of getting to work with ITRI on this brief summary of microtransit and exploration of its use here in Buncombe County. At the moment, IMD continues to provide grant funding both to support microtransit feasibility studies, as well as funding to support microtransit pilot programs in North Carolina. Today, we are joined by the Assistant Director of ITRI, Kai Monast, who co-authored the study Public Microtransit Pilots in the State of North Carolina, Operational Characteristics, Costs, and Lessons Learned. It is essentially an overview of the state of practice of microtransit as it stands in North Carolina. In conversations with Kai, we identified the North Buncombe Trailblazer service area as having potential for microtransit use. While Buncombe County at this time has not applied for a grant for either the feasibility study nor the pilot programs, we did want to express preliminary interest in evaluation for microtransit. And with that, I will let Kai have it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me this afternoon. And please ask questions if you have any or if you need clarification. So, like I said, I'm Kai Monast with Institute for Transportation Research and Education. And if we go to the next slide. So the objectives that we worked out for this presentation were to discuss microtransit's potential application specifically for the North Buncombe Trailblazer route, and to share a back of the envelope analysis of microtransit's potential in that specific area, and to discuss options, answer questions, and talk about next steps. So on the surface, if you put the three Trailblazer routes together, you'd see the dark red at the bottom is the ridership for the North Buncombe Trailblazer route. So you can compare that to the green line at the top, which is the Inca Candler route, and the blue line, which is the Black Mountain Trailblazer. You'll see that the Black Mountain route has increased pretty rapidly in its ridership, and that's what we're looking at here is ridership. And then the green line for Inca Candler has maintained a fairly high numbers, but the red line for North Buncombe has not experienced a rapid increase, and it also kind of started lower than the other routes to begin with. So on the surface, it looks like it might be a good candidate to try a different approach. Next slide. And you can also look at productivity, which we often measure in terms of trips per hour. So on the left side, you'll see that the red route, again, is the North Buncombe Trailblazer, and per hour over the course of the 12 months of data that we looked at, averaging about 1.5 trips per hour versus Inca Candler, which is over 5, and the Black Mountain route, which is over 3. And we looked also just to make sure that the operating hours are roughly the same for each one of these routes, and they are. And if we do that, we can also put it in, as long as those operating hours are about the same per day, you can turn it into the right side, which is trips per day. And I sometimes think that just makes a little more sense to people, especially when you think that most of these trips are, they're one-way trips. And so the people who ride are often riding it to get back home. And so with 5 trips per day for the North Buncombe Trailblazer, no, I'm sorry, with 10 trips per day, we're probably looking at 5 people per day who took the route to their destination and then took that route from their destination back home. So it's 10 total trips, 5 trips for the North Buncombe, 5 people for the North Buncombe route. About 50 total trips, or about 25 people for the Inca Candler route per day. And then the Black Mountain route is about 30 trips, or about 15 people per day. So what is microtransit and how could that help us here? Microtransit is on-demand public transportation. It's very similar to what you already have in the rural areas of Buncombe County. It's just that they typically use small vehicles, flexible stop locations, just like your demand response, but often there's an app involved. It doesn't have to be an app, but some kind of way of requesting the vehicle that tries to shorten the time between when a trip is requested and when a trip is delivered. And they do that with flexible stop locations. So it can look like a lot of different things, but the key elements are on-demand, small vehicles, and flexible stop locations. And it's different than what you currently have with your deviated fixed routes, the 3 routes that we just spoke about, in that the characteristic, like the travel path for a deviated fixed route, is almost always predetermined. At least you can draw a map. It has a line on it. Now the vehicle might deviate some off of that line, but it's mostly predetermined. Microtransit is very flexible. There's really no line you can draw on a map as to where microtransit is going to go. The vehicle size, often it's about a medium-sized vehicle for deviated fixed. For microtransit, it's usually a very small vehicle. Travel demand that can be handled by deviated fixed routes is you can deal with peaks associated with bell times for community colleges or shift times for industries, or you can deal with constant demand in deviated fixed route. But for microtransit, what you really want is a constant low demand spread out over time. The land use for deviated fixed route is medium to low density, whereas microtransit tends to be very low density. To have a deviated fixed route, you often have to have a decent pedestrian network. So people do have to get from their origin location to the stop. So you need to have a good to adequate pedestrian network. Whereas microtransit, you can actually go door to door, curb to curb, meaning that the pedestrian network does not have to be good. It can be even a very poor pedestrian network. Now, going back to passengers per hour, in a deviated fixed route, you might be able to get to about 20 passengers per hour, depending on the route design and the number of deviations. But for microtransit, I definitely don't expect you to get more than 4 passengers per hour, even in the best case scenario. Next slide. So going back to that 4 passengers per hour, that's kind of what I've highlighted here in yellow. If you were to convert your deviated fixed route into microtransit, you'd expect between 2 to a maximum of 4 passenger trips per hour. And you'll see that the Inca Candler route, not a very good choice for that, because they're already doing above that number. And the Black Mountain route is right there, a little bit higher than the middle of that number. So North Buncombe again stands out as being a potential place for the application of microtransit. Now, how you set up microtransit is certainly going to have an impact on the actual productivity that you're going to experience, whether you take reservations beforehand, whether everything is on demand, the size of the vehicle, the size of the service area, the wait times, they all matter into how much productivity you can actually achieve. But again, it's reasonable to consider North Buncombe as a good candidate. So we looked at the costs, and this is It's back of the envelope. So I show you the numbers. Um, but operating days per year of the existing deviated fixed route, 312, with about 8 hours of operating and revenue service every single day. And an hourly cost of about $67.50 an hour. And I say about there because I think Mountain Mobility's contracts are in mile terms, not hour terms. And so I had to do some conversions to try to put that into hours because microtransit, you have no idea how many miles you're going to go, but you do have a pretty good idea how many hours you need to pay for. So that's a conversion that I did right there to get 6750, and calculated that the annual cost of the North Buncombe route is about $150,000 per year as it currently exists. And then I had to make some assumptions. So assumptions about what's it going to look like, what's microtransit going to look like, and so if you can do a full private implementation of microtransit where you pay a third party to bring in software, to bring in operators, and to bring in vehicles. And from experience across the state, we're looking at probably $85 an hour for that kind of situation. And we know that you're going to need at least one vehicle for every hour to meet the existing demand, the people who are currently riding on the North Buncombe deviated fixed route. But we'd also expect that as the service becomes advertised and popular, that you will probably, during peak hours, probably run out of space. So the space being 2 to 3 passenger trips per hour, you might get 4 to 5 passenger trips per hour. And so during those peak periods, whenever they are, we'd have to have probably 2 vehicles on hand during those peak periods. And so I'm expecting that 2 vehicles per hour in general, and 4 vehicles per hour at peak times. Right, just because we know our baseline is 1 vehicle per every hour, there's going to be more demand than that we expect when you start offering door-to-door service. So we expect the demand to expand the operations to a total of 10 hours per day. Some of those hours will have 4 vehicles, some of them 2 vehicles. Next slide. And so with that, 2 vehicles for fully 10 hours a day, that's 20 hours. And then 2 additional vehicles for the peak. Maybe that's 3 hours morning peak, 3 hours afternoon. So that's an additional 12 hours a day. And so we'd have 32 operating hours per day, whereas right now we have 8 hours of operating per day. And so that's already a multiple of 4 increase, right? And then there's probably a higher price if we go with the private operator. And so I expect that the cost to do the service that I just outlined here would be about $850,000 a year in the North Buncombe area as a turnkey operation, which is about $700,000 more than you are currently paying for the North Buncombe route. Next slide. Now, what we've seen in other sites across North Carolina is that it doesn't take long for the capacity that you put on the streets to be consumed. So I added a contingency in the beginning to have two vehicles at all times plus 2 more during the peak. But it certainly could be possible that the community would demand even more capacity be put on the street. And so maybe not the first year, but the second year, I would think you might want to think about an extra $200,000 to extend your operating hours and add more capacity maybe during the middle of the day. So ultimately, I would think you would need to budget for about just over $1 million to run microtransit the way that the community will probably want microtransit to be run once it gets started. And so the first year cost won't be that much, but your longer term cost will get to that number in as quickly as year 2, I would think, which is about $900,000 more than you're currently paying. Next slide. So another option is that you could, instead of going the official third-party version and provide all the capacity that the demand is inducing, or all the capacity that the demand calls for. You could do cheaper, less fancy version. An alternative option is you could use your existing mountain mobility service operating. Use the service that's being operated right now, but replace the North Buncombe route, which is a deviated fixed route, replace it with microtransit. Basically, you could just change the name. And instead of having a route, you could serve door to door, curb to curb, or even set up stops along the way that were a little bit closer to where people live and where they want to go. And then you can advertise those to your existing riders, and they can schedule the trips by the phone, if assuming that there's enough capacity in at the call center to handle that. And they don't need a fancy app to do that. And we've seen examples of that in some communities across the state. And you can gauge the interest, and you can just kind of run it as a pilot, and then build the program organically over time. And so to start with, yeah, I think you'd still need the $150,000 a year. I think that money might go a little further as microtransit than it will as a deviated fixed route, just because the vehicle types will be a little bit different. But it'll be fairly close to the same price. So that's the low number, and I know it seems a little hard to believe. You can take that kind of the service that you're already doing. Just know that there's plenty of capacity to drop people off at their origin, at their destination, or pick them up at their origin, considering the low volumes that are currently being carried. So next slide. So I think it's a reasonable option to consider North Buncombe Trailblazer as a microtransit area. I think you can engage the existing contract to operate microtransit. I think that's going to basically get it started quicker, let you pilot the idea, see how the community likes it without committing to a third-party vendor and changes in technology and things like that. Basically, you set up what you want it to be, and then you go and find a vendor and or technology to match what you've already decided you want. What typically happens is the technology provider comes in and tells you what you want, and then you try to create your service to match what they can offer you. But if you did it from the ground up using your existing service, you could probably be more discerning in how you set it up. Technology is not required. You can use phone calls. Of course, the key is the service area delineation and operating policies like fares and what's your response time going to be. So there still needs to be some research and public meetings about that. But always, in this case, be prepared to expand your service. So do you have some extra money on the side? Moving forward, I do think converting to microtransit will improve access in the North Buncombe Trailblazer route area. I do think you will need additional funds, whether it's up to $1 million. I think it's up to $1 million. You could go lower than that. But do be prepared, no matter what you start with, that the next year it's going to cost more. Low-tech solutions could be implemented in weeks, really, assuming the staff capacity still exists and you don't need to modify any contracts that are on hand. But you could also do the full third-party vendor with the implementation study and RFPs, and it would be 10 to 20 months before you get started. And I think now we're going to turn it back over to...
Yes, thank you, Kai.
You're welcome.
Just a few brief additions from us staff, further considerations that we just want you to be mindful of. First of all, we would anticipate that there would be definitely an impact on our existing customers' pattern of use in that area, possibly a transition from the current demand response customers onto the microtransit. Further, there would be a lost connection to the existing ART route. I believe it's the N1 connects off Elk Mountain Road to our existing Trailblazer service, and so that loss of connection for anyone using that route. Additionally, we would, as Kai mentioned, we could expect an increase from induced demand, because this would hypothetically be an improved product to provide to this area that does not currently exist. Capacity constraints have been an issue now for several years. We have improved that considerably. However, driver shortages are still existent throughout the state, and we are not independent of that trend. Fare structures, we don't charge fares on any of our existing service types that we operate on behalf of Buncombe County. We do charge a fare for services we provide on behalf of the city, but that would be a change that we would need to create and to create an equitable way to do so. There would be immediate cost impacts in terms of our predictability for what the first year, for example, would demand in terms of existing costs. The North Buncombe Trailblazer has a very predictable cost, whereas this may not. And the long-term cost impacts would be even cloudier, given the possibilities for increases in demand. And finally, we would need to we would have to engage with our existing contractor to renegotiate a contract to provide a different type of service. Right now, our existing contract specifically lays out what types of service we provide, and this would be a change therein. And so, and then, of course, a part of all of this would definitely need to incorporate a public engagement process. This would be a change, particularly for the North Buncombe area, that wouldn't, at least at first, be available to anyone else in the county. And so how we go about that and when and how we move forward with such a program. And that's all I have. If there's any questions for me or for Kai, we will happily take them.
Thank you, William. And we're getting into this some, but I would like if you could flesh out some more of kind of the pros and cons from our community standpoint, from those with the ridership, as well as from the staff point of view.
Certainly. You know, I don't think we can look at this without engaging our equity lens. This is a comparatively higher income part of the county. So if we are providing a superior level of service to this area, what does that mean for other parts of the county that aren't, at least initially, getting to enjoy it? So that said, this route is underperforming. There are, I'm sure, people who value it, but you look clearly at the numbers, the differences between the Inca-Candler route, which has been very consistent over the last 5 years, even given the pandemic, and then the Black Mountain Trailblazer, which has seen a very large increase in the last year, particularly because we are once again able to serve a variety more constituents there. And so, yeah, the balance of providing a better level of service for this area versus what we're able to provide broadly. And again, as an example that DOT, North Carolina DOT, provides regularly is Wilson, North Carolina. They got rid of their existing transit system and replaced it with microtransit, in no small part thanks to pilot funds to help them with that. But as Kai shared with us, their costs tripled in 3 years. So that's probably not something that we could reasonably anticipate being able to afford, at least, you know, not without some more difficult conversations. And so, you know, cost, service, equity, these are all things that we have to consider in this lens.
I guess I'll throw my 2 cents in, and I also have a question. It just seems like maybe I kind of had sticker shock with that first alternative microtransit plan, but given the level of ridership, it seems like maybe that second alternative where you would just basically try out a door-to-door kind of service and see how that goes, and that might be something to consider. With that said, William, I think your first slide, not your first slide, your like third slide about the Integrated Mobility Division, I don't think I knew they existed.
It was previously known as the Public Transportation Division, and it was merged with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Division to create the Integrated Mobility Division. That happened in the last 5 years.
The word synergy comes to mind. Okay. What was I going to ask? Oh, it sounds like they have grants, which is cool. I would be interested if staff, maybe you have already looked into this or not, but if there's grant programs out there for like car sharing programs. I think that Zipcar is probably the most famous brand out there, something like that. And then also e-bike rental kind of deployment programs, if there's grant funding for studying that or piloting those types of things would be of interest in addition to this. So, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. If you go to the microtransit service in North Buncombe, the slide says there's the expectation that you can't get more than 2 to 4 trips per hour. What is the limiting factor on that? Like, why is it limited to 4? Is it the capacity of these smaller vehicles, or is it just sort of on average, each trip takes 15 to 30 minutes, and therefore that's just how many trips you can make in an hour if you're using this door-to-door service? So just a little bit more detail on why 4 trips per hour is the max on this service model.
I will let you answer that.
Yeah. So first off, that's the highest that we have observed across the country so far. And in the areas that do get the highest trips per hour tend to be denser as far as origins and destinations. They're a lot closer together. There's a lot more and they're a lot closer together than you're going to get in Weaverville area. So the Wilson is just gotten past 4 trips per hour, but the main, because even though they're rural, they are 49,500 people. So they're 500 people away from an urbanized area and a very small area at that. So it is pretty dense environment. But what you end up with is when you request a vehicle, there's deadhead from wherever that vehicle is to come and get you. Then you get on that vehicle, there's load time, and then you have to travel from your origin to the destination. And then there's usually a little bit of a dwell time at the destination to let you off and maybe queue up the next trip. And so given all of those little time considerations, if you were to carry 4 people per hour, that means each one of those only takes 15 minutes. Now, the way you get that number up is if you start sharing more trips, but that requires a certain volume of service that's out there. And so in a area like Weaverville, North Buncombe, the volume is really just not going to be there to be picking up neighbors and taking them to roughly the same place. So you're probably going to be doing just a lot of one-off trips that go from what I call many to many. So there's many origins at many times going to many destinations.
Okay, but let's just say hypothetically there were more interest in it, more people who wanted to participate under this model. Is it such that let's say there were 2 or 3 people who were all scheduled to take a trip around the same time, that the participants don't necessarily have the expectation that they automatically get taken directly to where their destination is? If there's somebody else who's also using transit at the same time and it's sort of along the way, they might get dropped off first and then they go over to drop off the next person. You would sort of use this sort of logical way to kind of most efficiently take all the people to where they need to go. It's not necessarily, it's door to door, but it's still community transit, right? So it's not that you get taken right to where you want to go first every single time.
That's correct. It's still shared ride. So
Yep.
There's always the expectation of an additional person that you don't know might be on that vehicle.
Yep, okay. So the slides talk about using smaller vehicles. So I just wanted to get a little more detail on that. The mountain mobility vehicles are, smaller than a lot of like municipal buses. But when we talk about the microtransit, are you talking about a still smaller vehicle than what mountain mobility currently uses, or something of similar size?
That's an operational choice. Some systems have gone down to sedans with separate fleets of ADA accessible vehicles. Some are using minivans that are accessible. And some even have light transit vehicles that will hold 10 to 15 passengers. But so we find that the vehicle capacity is not the limiting factor, it's the time that's the limiting factor.
So if we went with the option where we work with the existing contractor and decided to start something soon, they may very well just continue to use the existing vehicles as one option, but it sounds like you could explore even smaller vehicles as a potential option in the future.
That's correct.
Okay. So it was mentioned that you might lose, like as a negative, you might lose the connection to the existing Asheville transit route. But if someone wanted to go downtown, couldn't they just go from their house and be taken to that that connection, which they currently use Trailblazer for? Couldn't they still just use this service to go to the connection and then catch the city bus? So would we really be losing that if we use this model?
Not necessarily, no. It's a time question. The ease of using the Trailblazer is simply its predictability. There would hypothetically be times where a microtransit would be at capacity and the time constraints therein, whereas the Trailblazer comes at the same time every day. And it's more of a predictability
So
question.
the rider kind of knows, I'm going to get there at this time, whereas this, it's a little bit less certain, although also, like, they come to your house and get you, so that's nice, right?
Right.
Okay. And so our system is fare-free currently, right? The Trailblazer system is fare-free. If we said, yeah, let's do a pilot project, like let's do the option of a pilot project using our existing contractor, try that for a year. Would the recommendation be to keep it fare-free during the pilot project, see what the demand is? Or would there be, do you think you would make a recommendation to go ahead and start charging some fare for this service? What is the current thinking on that?
I would have to do further research before I made a recommendation on that.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I mean, I definitely think, the current policy on fare-free for Trailblazer makes a lot of sense because like the demand is very low. So trying to kind of think of it as like a revenue source isn't really, it just doesn't make any difference. And so it's just like, why not just provide this service? But it would be easy to see how the demand for this would be, significantly more. And so perhaps that would be, I think the fare-free is great, but it may, I can see how it may be worth considering different options for this service. Which could also, I mean, if you basically kept the, there's the 150 we're already spending. If you actually started generating some revenue for it, then maybe you could provide a little bit of expanded services without necessarily needing more county funding for it. But that would all have to be looked at, right?
It would be atypical for a transit system to generate sufficient funds through fares to cover the expansion on its own.
Totally, but it would be something, potentially.
Correct.
All right, well, those are my questions for now. Other questions?
Well, I just want to thank staff for looking into this and for us to continue to assess how we can improve our public transportation. So thank you all.
Thank you.
What's the next step on this? I mean, I'll say, I think the option 3 sounds really good. The other 2 options sound, like not worth considering at all just due to the cost. For when there's another option that's so similar that costs, 15% of the others. But the option 3 sounds pretty good. So what comes next?
We would need to engage our, of course, the public, as we mentioned earlier. We would need to engage our existing contractor to assess current capacity. Again, the Trailblazer only uses one vehicle at a time and one operator, and to see what sort of service constraints there are. But that would be, I believe, the starting point. Matt,
Commissioners,
you
before
have a-
that starting point, it really was to gauge interest to see if you guys wanted to go forward with something else. Terry did ask us to take a look, so now we want to know, as a board, do you want us to put this on the list as a project to look at? That was really what we're asking.
It doesn't seem like a status quo, so could just do the same thing over and over again, doesn't seem like the right plan to me.
I mean, the current service is incredibly underutilized, right? So we should absolutely explore options for how we could spend the same or a similar amount of money and get greater utilization. Seems like absolutely that we should explore that. It would be, and I don't know if this is an area that we're going to be able to necessarily expand the investment into, but, and the demand might grow, but that would be a future conversation, right? I mean, right now, it's just, we know we're spending a lot of money to get very little public benefit from it. So I like this idea. Others? Okay. All right, so we'll engage with the contractor and see if they're open to it and go from there.
Has capacity, so we'll take it to, we just wanted to make sure you guys are interested, and if this yes, then staff can take a look to see what we can bring back to you.
Okay, but can I just ask one, because
Yeah.
but going down this path doesn't necessarily presuppose that we are committed to doubling or tripling the amount of funding for this, right? We could just say, we like the investment level, let's try to get more ridership out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Very good. All right, hey, thank you for bringing this forward. Thanks, Terry, for elevating this idea too for everyone to think about. All right. Next up, safety and justice strategies and grant update. And Tiffany's here to help us out with this. Thanks for being here, Tiffany.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am coming with good news, great news. Excited about all the work that we're doing. So the title is Justice Innovations in Jail Management Population. I have a few grants that we're working towards implementing that talks about our innovation and how we incorporate that into trying to maintain a jail population that's manageable. So I will talk through our kind of biggest award, which is the Safety and Justice Challenge, look at the jail population data, and then go into specifics about our strategies. So as a reminder, we have been participating in the MacArthur Foundation's Safety and Justice Challenge since 2016. We received kind of an innovation award that was right around the time of the FJC or the establishment of one. And so we used that grant funds to hire pretrial services staff to kind of help monitor the defendants with the increase in people seeking services. And then we were invited to apply for a larger sum of money, which included $1.75 million. And I'll talk specifically about those strategies. We were able to be more laser focused in our approach in 2021. And then and most recently, we got a sustainability award looking at how do we sustain the work that's happening. And the Safety and Justice Challenge is a large network of cities and counties across 30 states. And so our most recent budget, I just included in this presentation for you all to be aware of. And as I talk about the work, just know that we're funding positions, technology, and supporting community in doing the work. So when we're looking specifically at our strategies, we broke the buckets down into 5. As I said, we were refining the work. We were very ambitious in our first award, and we've been working really to be more strategic in our approach. The first 2 strategies are increasing pretrial release and increasing efficiencies in our case processing. So basically looking at how do we get people out of jail quicker through support. Also, how do we move cases quicker through the system? So if they're being disposed of, they are not in our detention facility, but they're either been on probation or sentenced to prison, or their case is just being disposed of. Those are our 2 primary strategies when it comes to jail population. I highlighted them in bold. We are seeing a reduction in recidivism and length of stay. I also do want to note that ASHRIT, the Community Diversion and Community Reentry Team, were funded to 2 grants that we received in addition to the Safety and Justice Challenge. And then the last 3 strategies are really augmented around the work and supporting the work that we do. So ensuring the community is engaged, addressing, advancing racial equity, and then looking at strategies, community safety and violence prevention. This report, I believe you all may be receiving this bi-weekly, but it just shows our average daily jail population. We are trying to ensure that we're at an occupancy around 85%, anything higher in the 90s. The sheriff's office and the detention staff have to look at effective ways to manage. So we're looking at our jail population continuously, and this is just a snapshot in time on October 30th. And one thing that I will talk about is our failure to appear strategies. At the time of this report, there were 55 people that were booked in jail. Their only arrest was due to not showing up to court. Our strategies in increasing pretrial release includes two grants that I mentioned, community diversion and community reentry. We were just fortunate to get awarded two grants at the same time, and so we really worked hard to synthesize the work that was happening. One grant was in partnership with the Sheriff's Office. They received funding through the Department of Health and Human Service, the State Department. And this grant was looking at those who are assigned to pretrial and probation. They were providing and focusing on serving those who need basic needs and had opioid use disorders and chronic medical condition. This created one grant position in the JRC. Then that grant sunsetted and we kind of absorbed the work through our department. We also received another grant through Dogwood that was then picked up where we were able to use opioid settlement funds to continue, and that was similarly aligned, but really connecting folks that were being released to community resources and housing. It added 4 positions, including a program manager, 1 case manager, and 2 peer support community health workers. And both grants were kind of centered around helping those being released or justice involved with access to treatment, access to housing, access to basic needs, bus tickets if they needed to get to court, just really trying to get people the supports they need so they don't recidivate. When we looked at our programs, we compared and did an analysis with the data that we had, equally serving about 250 people. This is the breakdown of who was being served. Like I noted, the community diversion, as we named it, those were looking at probation and pretrial. So probation is those who have been sentenced to probation. They have a charge that they've been convicted of. And then pretrial supervision is those waiting for trial. And as you can see, a third one housed in one program and about a half in the other. And so we're specifically looking at our community diversion program findings. Again, there's about 207 people, and 170 of those had at least one booking prior to the start of the grant. 3 months after participating, there was about a 39% reduction, and about 6 months out, there was about a 22% reduction. And so we broke this down by demographics. So there was reduction in all populations.
Hey, question, just make sure I'm hearing this correctly. When you say a reduction, that's a reduction in the recidivism rate, or what's that a reduction of?
The reduction of being booked into the facility. So it could include a new charge, but it also can include like failure to appears. That's not a new charge, it's maybe a process type that you didn't come to court. So it is about coming back into the jail. Did I answer the question?
Still not sure I'm totally clear on that.
Okay.
I think it is about, they're not coming back to jail. After 6 months out being in this program, we've seen a 22% reduction in those same individuals coming back to jail. So it is
Compared to
about.
sort of the overall pattern that we would
Yes.
otherwise expect.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, yes, and to even be more specific, there was about 103 bookings. That means the time that they came to jail. 3 months out, they dropped to 63 bookings. So that's the hard numbers.
Great.
So it went from 103 to 63.
Okay, great.
And we looked at this program, they were able to quantify like the work that they were doing in terms of interventions. So cell phone, multiple interventions, that mean a combination of basic needs, gift cards for food, cell phones. Then the other one was the cell phone and transitional housing, and we broke that out. One thing about cell phones I think that are important is we have a court reminder system. People have access to checking in with their pretrial services, case manager and probation. If you don't check in, that could be grounds for recidivating or bringing back to jail. So having those interventions and access to services was key, and it was about a 58% reduction in the 3 months out, and then 6 months out, it's about 39%. Then when we looked at the other grant-funded positions and their efforts, we also noticed a decrease in bookings or people coming back to jail. We broke theirs out by demographics as well. And that was what we indicated on both of these slides: race, gender, age, housing status. And then there's a summary slide. So the community diversion, the greatest reductions were in Black males ages 40 to 49, unsheltered, on pretrial supervision, and those who received multiple interventions. When it came to community reentry, the greatest reductions were experienced by females. Blacks experienced a greater reduction in bookings than whites during the first 3-month period, but then that was reversed at the 6-month period. And then females experienced a greater reduction in bookings than males, but that difference started narrowing at the 6 months mark. And we're about 6 months into our data, so I think in the next year, we'll start looking at a year out too. All right. Other strategies I mentioned that is working is our jail review team. And that is when a weekly meeting of court partners, including an ADA, assistant public defender, pretrial staff, they're looking at specific bookings on Wednesday, about 20 to 25, and they're pulling this report. And they meet weekly, and what we've noticed in this is major reductions in the length of stay for the cases that they review. There's a reduction of length of stay, but it's not the same across race, gender, and top charge. The greatest reduction seen by white males charged with low-level felonies, and VRA is the Victim Rights Act, so it didn't have a victim associated with that charge. And it's not having an impact on our racial disparities within the jail. So this is overall a graphic. If you look at the H&I felonies, that is our driver of our jail population, because there's a lot of those cases and they can sit there longer. And so that was about half of the jail length of stay, from 125 to 67 for those charges that the jail review team was looking at. We're also doing other activities, court reminder campaign. We have a court navigator in the lobby. We're trying to automate the court reminder system, so people coming in jail, they can sign up for our program and get notified. And we're doing a lot of advertisement, radio, billboard, social media on the importance of showing up to court. A part of our grant was just doing some wayfinding and helping people access the complexities of our judicial system. So having someone that's forward-facing at the lobby that can help people register for their courts or just wayfind or get access to services sooner rather than later. So we thought we were gonna do about, the person was gonna have about 200 people that they interact with the first 6 months. In the first 4 months, it was 2,592 people, and we did about 98% just wayfinding, 81% referrals to community resources, including the JRC that's in the courthouse, and then 50% just information and registration to like our court reminder system. So that's a person that is kind of forward-facing. We do have a process where people are getting booked, when they're booked in the jail, we can automatically enroll them when they're being released. And so we do have a large amount of people, 50%, that are volunteering to get notified when they go to court. We're also looking at advancing racial equity. That's our driver's license restoration program, providing culture-aligned counseling, and offering education and training. So driver's license restoration is an important aspect of workforce development, getting people jobs, helping them not get deeper involvement in the criminal justice system, helps with childcare stability, all the things. So we're working in partnership with Pisgah Legal to look at how we can restore driver's license sooner rather than later. It is a large task to get the license restored. Using this contract, so far about 30 individuals have had their license restored or become eligible to have their license restored. And we're looking at like the nature of the charges. People lose their license for not showing up to court, for unpaid fines and fees, DWI related, and just having to do restoration if they've been charged. The majority of the driver's license that are being revoked is for fines and fees, not being able to pay a fine or a fee in the courts. We also noticed that when people were had substance use disorders, or their charge was related to a substance use offense, they were ordered to treatment, but Black folks were not necessarily seeking the treatment. They didn't feel like they had representation. We partnered with a local organization that is culturally aligned counseling, and they were able to help people access to substance abuse counseling services. We also provide trauma-informed training within the courts. And our other strategies include advancing safety and violence prevention. As you know, our initial funding through this, for this project was Safety and Justice Challenge, and we're infusing that work with the additional funding we received through ARPA and through DOJ. We had 8 community-based organizations completing the training. They have met with over 500 community members. This has grown wings, and we get calls every day. They're calling the trainer in Wilmington, like, how can we amplify this work in Asheville? We've partnered with the Land of Sky Go Places program. They've also been trained in this model, and the purpose of the model is really to look at preventive and public health interventions to reduce community violence. We had hosted a Mother's Day event. This was featured by mothers who lost their children to gun violence. We've also been working in partnership with DOJ and attending their conferences to make sure we have the structure in place to successfully implement the program. And then we've also, kind of our next steps, we plan on publishing our community safety and violence prevention plan. We will continue to get technical assistance from our technical assistance provider, CASM. We are building our training capacity to create system advocates as well, partnering with the community paramedics and other community-based organizations. And one thing that I'm excited to announce is our work in youth empowerment solutions. And that's really inviting the youth to be a part of the work and designing what the work looks like, changing their built environment and the structures and the communities that they live in. And they have a team of youth that are working towards this. The grant money provides stipends, so we're able to offer funding to help us do the work and build the network. And I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I have a question. You mentioned 55 failure to appear. That's pretty striking that 55 people had to go into our detention center for that reason. What specifically are we doing trying to keep that from happening?
Sure. I think a lot of it's information, providing information about the consequences to what happens if you don't come to court and you lose your driver's license, you end up being arrested. A lot of the work around substance use and getting people into treatment. If you're in active addiction, you're less likely to come to court. So that's a way. Our court reminder system, so notifying people when their court date is, are just some of the strategies. We do know childcare, transportation, and getting off of work are also 3 barriers that are like system level barriers. So we're just curious to work with community to see how we can support those 2 who have those barriers but need to come to court.
Thank you, and thanks for this thorough update as well.
Thank you.
Tiffany, I've got a couple questions, and I may stagger them just because we have a good number of slides here, a lot of data to process, look at. In terms of the number of cases we're processing, what we're talking about in terms of failures to appears or jail bookings, is there any breakdown or means of tracking that data across different courtrooms, right? Because in an admin week where we have traffic court, you can get an FTA entered against you, but we also have like 1,000 people a day come through court, so 55 wouldn't even be a large number for 55 people missing court in traffic court. But there is a big difference if this were 3B, for example, where we're dealing with cases that are on the precipice of being indicted, being sent to Superior Court. Is there any kind of metric for us looking at which ones are cases that are being actively prosecuted in one of the 1A, 2B, 3B courtrooms versus just the kind of overflow traffic court hodgepodge we're dealing with there?
We can look at it mostly by charge, top charge, but I think the top charge or where the charge is can also drive the courtroom. So we do have the ability to look at the failure to appear, and we have actually, and I can provide that information about what we're seeing in terms of the charges attached to the failure to appears.
I think that would be helpful, only because as I'm thinking through this, if the goal is to reduce the number of times that someone misses court, the more court appearances you have, the more likely you are to be called and failed, have an FTA entered, be arrested. But that doesn't necessarily say anything about opportunities to resolve the case or what services you're getting in the interim. Do we have any way of correlating the data that you gave us against, I guess, kind of what's happening in those courtrooms, right? If someone's coming to court over and over again and isn't doing anything except having their case continued, it's inevitable at some point they're going to get sick, their kid's going to have an issue. All the issues that we think about in terms of equity for marginalized populations are going to remain an issue. Is there any way for us to kind of address that part? Because it feels like we're going to stave off a symptom rather than the greater root problem of resolve the case and let this person go on with their life, whatever it may be.
Yes, we can. We have done a deep dive, averaging, especially in district court, they are court cases like every month, or they get, so we looked at several cases that had 10 or more court appearances that they had to be present for. There has been conversations about how to reduce that. And so that is something that we're definitely trying to, or the courts are trying to explore how to reduce the number of court appearances that someone has to attend.
And for context, 10 court appearances is very likely the pendency of over a year and a half of just waiting to have that resolved.
Yes, that's not even the actual resolution, yes.
I've got one question. I guess I'm curious with, if you read the newspaper, the Asheville Police Department's doing sweeps of some kind throughout downtown, and I'm curious if there's, perhaps there's not data yet, but if there could be data on how that's impacting the county's goal of reducing the jail's population.
I think that definitely is something to look at and to explore. I don't think we have enough data yet. When I am looking at the charges that are being brought in, those are also low-level misdemeanors. So the likelihood of somebody staying in custody for a long time on those charges are not likely. One consideration too, we also have to look at, was there is a recent change to state statute where the district courts have to set a bond. So traditionally on certain cases, the magistrate could kind of make unsecured bond at that first appearance when they came in the jail. But now they have to wait for the next day or over the weekend to actually see a district court judge. And that also might change the trajectory of our jail population as well.
Just want to make sure I understood what you said. In your experience so far with these sweeps, the persons that are coming in, their offenses, so to speak, are so low level that are they staying in the jail days, weeks, or what's kind of your general view so far?
We can definitely pull that data. I think anecdotally, the charges that you see come before, now there have been some higher level ones, but most of them are low level where they do not have, jail time is not even an active sentence on the charge. So if they were getting sentenced to these charges, it would include a fine at most. Also depends on how many charges they had. So there are some considerations. We can definitely look into the jail data and determine how long have people been staying after these sweeps.
Just to follow up on that, and thanks for walking us through this. So someone's arrested on a low-level misdemeanor charge. They're booked for a few days. And then the next step in the process is a court date, and they're assigned likely a public defender. So the public defender's office gets involved. And then the court system, if they show up and there's a trial, it sounds like in some of these cases there would be a fine. And then if they miss that court date, they would then have an FTA, which means they could be picked up and booked on an FTA. I'm just trying to understand how this cycle fits into our broader community efforts to safely reduce the jail population and intervene in that cycle and break those patterns. It seems like that pattern seems to be exactly the pattern we're trying to break through our diversion efforts and our efforts to reduce recidivism and bookings on FTAs. So I'm just wondering, maybe there's a pause moment at the level of kind of in real time how we're thinking through how different systems are intersecting with each other. You don't have to comment on this. You're welcome to be interested to hear your perspective, but also interested in hearing other commissioners' perspectives sort of on how we make sure we stay laser focused on the strategies that we're investing so much in at the county level and across multiple county departments and agencies.
The call for Tiffany to answer.
I dropped the mic. Anyone else can pick it up.
Yeah, it seems to me, and this is just to make sure I'm completely understanding, the community diversion efforts and community reentry efforts are different, distinct things, right? Like one is housed under safety and justice, the other is county funds. Is that correct?
They were both grant fund positions. We just happened to be awarded at the same time, so the work is very similar. It's just, we wanted to look at each grant separately. We could have combined it, but we just wanted to see what the outcomes for each grant in terms of reporting was. And there were very similar findings, right? Like, we had personnel to provide basic needs. We had them to be able to provide housing. I think our one issue with housing is we're paying for temporary housing. We still have not, and that's like that higher level question you asked about, how do we address affordable housing? How do we ensure transportation? Our clients are facing these issues daily, and we're just managing cases and trying to get them transportation, trying to get them basic needs. We had gift cards for like Ingles, so if they apply for food stamps, but it doesn't come to the next 30 days, like, can we get somebody food for 4 weeks, to help out? So
So I suppose to the reason I raise that point, not that I particularly care about where the funding comes from necessarily, but just in terms of addressing what Jasmine raised, Commissioner Beach-Ferraro raised, as us trying to address a root cause through any number of these mechanisms, right? So driver's license restoration, if we're spending about $480 some odd per person, and they get 90 yards down the line, right up to the last fee being paid, and then miss court, that's a whole nother set of fees that we're not only moving them backwards, but best case scenario, that's just another fee for them to pay. If they're looking for housing, if they're on pretrial supervision, for example, and one of the conditions is that this person is being supervised, assuring that they're not harming the community, that they're abiding by all lawful conditions assigned to them by a judge, they're receiving multiple interventions that we're paying whatever metric you want to put to it, right? I saw that you listed multiple different forms of interventions, so they'll cost different amounts, but whatever intervention we're using is costing specific money and is making progress by the data you're giving us. And then we're disrupting that progress at each stage that we're doing this. So how do we capture where that breakdown is? Do we need to put it into monetary terms? Do we have a city contemporary that we can speak with so we're all walking the same direction? Because it feels like a 3 steps forward, intentional 2 steps back, and we're gonna bankroll the next 3 steps forward as well. So one of those options I'd like to mitigate if we can, but I guess that's the solution that I'm looking for an answer for, not just from you, but in a greater sense from Commission. What's our role going to be in addressing what looks like a very weird use of our funds, trying to fix root causes and respond to this in a way that is kind of thwarting our own efforts?
I don't know, does the staff have any thoughts on that? I'm again, just kind of sort of open-ended questions here.
I do have
Yeah.
well, I heard in your response, Commissioner, like strategic planning on a strategic level. I was at a conference, and this was a light bulb for me. I think one of the police chiefs and a DA was present, and the police chief said we were locking everyone up for marijuana because it was still illegal, and we found out the DA was dismissing all the charges, and so we had this frustration of like we were wasting a bunch of resources, and they came together and aligned their efforts, right, to figure out how to best approach it where they weren't expending resources, kind of being counterintuitive to their practices. So they came up with a strategic plan to address it. Honestly, I don't remember what that strategic plan was, but they did talk about their misalignment and how it was exhausting resources.
Commissioners, I would say that we do have a process in place, JRAC, right? Justice Resource Advisory Council, that has all those partners at the table. If there's a way that we can get some direction from you and we can work, I think you are our liaison, Commissioner Moore, to that panel, it would be great to have those people at the table to talk through about those intersections and talk through about strategic planning and how we can move forward together versus doing these things separately. So I think that is the best forum to take this conversation.
And what specifically would be helpful from us at this point?
I think some of the conversations we just had asking, what is our role and how do we start talking about those intersections and how do we not take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back by other actions by different partners at the table? So making sure we all understand what those partners are planning to do, and then we can talk about how do we show up in those spaces. But I don't think that conversation has happened. We've tried. Not every single person is at the table every time. So I think that is our first place into getting this kind of conversation going.
And how do we proceed if said partners who are not at the table continue not coming to the table? And they're needed to be at the table.
I think in terms of what we have control over as county commission, we affirm what our position is going to be as a board. We sit here and ask ourselves, is this something that we're actually committed to making progress on and seeing our funds go in an appropriate fashion that the public has entrusted us to do, right? We work a lot with the sheriff, we're working a lot with justice services. But I think us as a body need to be a unified voice in that. So whatever that looks like, I'd like to be able to go back to JRAC with a clear set of priorities of what we're looking at here, what we'd like to see change, and then decide how much interest there is in changing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds good. I guess just in terms of Jasmine and Martin, your comments, I mean, if there was more specifics, I mean, I'm hearing kind of the ideas, but I actually am not sure I'm quite getting like this. I think you've got some specific things in mind, but if those could be fleshed out, that would be helpful to me. Y'all have been more immersed in some of these issues than I have, so this is kind of high level, but I'm open to the conversation, but I'm actually not sure sort of like specifically what I think is on your mind.
Well, I mean, I think at a high level, to kind of take a swing at it, you know, we're at a critical juncture at the community level and in our collaborations with the city and other partners around really investing significant resources in reducing the unhoused population and doing so in a way that is helping people transition into safe, sustainable housing, but also address the sort of, you know, often entangled issues around mental health issues, criminal justice involvement, addiction, et cetera. So many, many, many county departments, staff, and resources are being deployed towards that effort. And, you know, I mean, I think Sheriff Miller has said it best, which is that you can't arrest your way out of these problems. So, I mean, I think the problem that we're facing is that, you know, we have a law enforcement agency that is deploying a strategy to arrest precisely the individuals who we are deploying all these other strategies to try to keep out of jail for many, many reasons, including efficient use of public resources. So you know, I think there's an inherent tension there.
You're talking about APD, not the sheriff's office?
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just asking to clarify, just so we can just be
Yeah,
clear about
no, that.
what are we talking about? And when we're talking about our resources, those aren't county resources, right? Those are, in terms of APD, they're not under our jurisdiction, right? So
No, they're not under our jurisdiction, not at all. But they quickly implicate resources under our jurisdiction because of resources at the detention facility and within the court system and justice services. And so I just think it's an unusual situation to be in, where there's so much collaboration happening across departments and agencies and across the city and county on so many initiatives. And then there's a new development that's contraindicated. And I just think naming it and figuring out how we get to the right people to the right table to talk through how this moves forward. And JRAC does seem like the right container for that, but to Commissioner Edwards' point, we need to make sure the right people are there at the table. Is that specific enough to?
Yep, just trying to get this as
Yeah.
clear as possible.
Okay.
Well, and to take that just a step further is, once they are at the table, being able to have those conversations about what if they're not on board with supporting the direction of the county, and how do we continue moving forward in our goals of what we believe is best when said partners aren't on board to support that. So I think that's a second piece of that conversation that has to occur.
Yeah, because we keep dancing around the same problem, and we all know who we're talking about. What do we do? How do we get city council on board, or the city manager, whoever the APD is reporting to? Because they continue to be the roadblock. I mean, it's frustrating as heck.
I think one practical thing we can do, and that we've been working on, just so folks have an update, I'm preempting our afternoon county meeting for board update, but I think it's relevant at this point. We had a retreat for JRAC to reengage partners to see who's going to be at the table. So when we name these problems, when we start stating what we want, we know who's there. We've tried to reengage them. Don't have control over some things, get that. But as far as level setting for the county, maybe creating some form of map, and this is an action item that we can do, is creating a resource map to figure out where we are, what services we're providing, where we're falling short, what areas we can pivot our money to in the event that we're not getting the engagement that we want, and just have a plan ready to go for any possibility. So that would be my ask if y'all are all interested in that, is putting together some kind of resource map of what we've got, and then we can figure out where we want to send funding to address where we are, regardless of what our partners do.
Thank you.
I have one other question. I mean, it's related, maybe distinct. So, and this, and I'm sure there's a long answer to this, and we probably don't have time for that today. So maybe just a shorter version. In terms of diversion efforts, so resources for folks who are interfacing with the justice system who have mental health issues, right? So I think there's, a lot of appreciation that as a state and a community, we don't have all the capabilities we would want to have in that space for treatment. As it relates to housing for folks who have mental health issues, are there particular resources that can be utilized to assist people with mental health issues to secure housing in our community? And like how significant of a factor is that playing into the populations that your
I think
team's
that's
working
a
with?
big factor, not only housing, but just mental health facilities to provide treatment. Usually acute hospitalizations are no more than 7 days. People get out and then they stop taking their medications. Our state hospitals have decreased the amount of beds, so you have to literally almost assault an ED staff before you get sent to the state hospitals. We do provide a housing. Many have co-occurring disorders with substance use. Housing means we're paying for recovery homes and private landlords who have maybe group homes. And but that's not sustainable, right? And that's a lot of what we see is like people leaving, transitioning, and end up being homeless and then trying to re-engage. So we don't have a great structure for safe housing for those who have mental illness. We're basically plugging holes, so to speak. Hopefully I answered your question.
It does. It does. I just, is it, if there were more, we've obviously got these affordable housing bond revenues. Is it a shortage of funding, or is it a shortage of actual housing for people to move into? I'm sure it's probably some combination of both, but like, what are the main limiting factors on trying to improve that situation in our community? If we were, we're saying like, hey, we want to address people who have housing insecurity more generally, but this is a part of our community that we want to particularly try to make greater progress on, then what would be the main avenues we could take to do better?
I think it's both. It's safe housing. VIA has a transitional to care program to get people even out of group homes, but it's equipped staff with being able to manage those who have mental health issues, and then the amount of affordable units and housing available. So it is a complex issue with, we need the housing, we need safe housing, we need staff equipped to support people with mental illness, more treatment providers equipped to handle those with severe and persistent mental illness, and getting the reimbursement rates to a point where we can pay people a wage to want to work in the mental health field and work with this population as well.
Can I add to that just one small concern? One of the things that complicates that is having a pending charge. So that's a realistic concern, right? If you have housing, you lose it. That is a housing insecurity issue for a lot of the people who are going through that. So they might have mental health issues and they get housing, but the second you have a new charge, you're out. So all the work, all the money we're putting into it is kind of in that same cyclical problem of if we're going to make that a barrier for people, we need to be aware that we're giving them housing for 30 days at a time.
With Compass Point coming online and the Ramada Inn, hopefully not too far down the road, I mean, a lot of the, I think 1/3 and 1/2 of the folks who were participating in the diversion programs were, had housing insecurity as an issue. Are you optimistic that those two, significant facilities will, some of these positive trends we're seeing will likely to see, like, there's room to further run on those with those, important projects coming online that should provide some additional housing options for folks with housing insecurity or who are homeless in the community?
Yes, we actually have a Familiar Faces program that I didn't talk about, but that looks at people with like 6 or more bookings in a year. Their goal is to coordinate rapidly with the services. I do know the funding units, supportive housing units we've had for those who were impacted by ED recidivism and jail recidivism. When they were housed, we did see a reduction. And so even, I know David Nash is here too, and we talked about crossing that list again for Familiar Faces and just keep adding and building to the work. So yes, to answer your question, we're hopeful to see that.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts, comments? It's a lot.
Can I just ask a quick technical question? So you were just saying if someone is on the cusp of getting housing and they pick up a new charge, they could lose that?
That's often the case.
And is that if it's only a felony charge, is it also a misdemeanor charge or a citation or?
The distinction's often not even between misdemeanor and felony, but whether it's a violent act of any kind. So if it's an accusation of any kind of violence, and that could be anything from, I'm trying to think of the lowest level crime that would involve violence, simple affray, just
Yeah.
two kids fighting on the street, both get tickets for it. If the housing complex deems that to be a violent crime, you might find yourself disqualified or removed from your housing.
Okay, that's helpful, thanks.
And that's specifically with like the housing authority or just more broadly?
Broadly, most housing complexes that we work with locally, even the private ones, have provisions in their leases that suggest that if you commit an act of violence, it's not necessarily intrinsically linked to charges, but that's the best evidence of some act.
All right.
Thank you. I'll follow up with the failure to appear data and the nuisance charges that were picked up and see what those length of stays were. Thank
All
you.
right, Tiffany, thanks. Appreciate the updates. All right, Commissioners, next item on our agenda is the Waste Pro contract.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. I'm Dane Peterson, Solid Waste Director. Chip Jingles, Regional Vice President of Waste Pro, joined us today, so thanks for being here, Chip. And Chairman, as you mentioned, we are here to discuss the residential waste collection update to provide to this board. So talking about background, the franchise waste collections contract was started in 2020, January 1st, 2020 with Waste Pro. This was a 5-year contract with two-year extension options. And the scope of service for this is weekly trash collection and every other week recycling collection in the unincorporated areas of the county. And through direction from the board, staff have been working on negotiating the extension terms with Waste Pro that could carry the scope of service through calendar year 28, excuse me. And also we asked, based on feedback we got from community survey information and conversations with the board, we did ask Waste Pro to provide a proposal on what a weekly recycling collection program could look like as far as fee impacts. So they were able to provide that. And talking about the extension offer from Waste Pro, so important to note as we move through the slides, the numbers, the dollar figures you see are per subscriber per month. So that's how that works. So currently this year, the cost is $22.55 per month. And in Waste Pro's proposal, the fees would basically, in a multi-year step process, increase to where they feel the current cost for service should be, instead of all at once upfront cost adjustment. So again, currently $22.55. In 2024, the fee would go up to $25.16. In 2025, that would be $28.52. And in 2026, that fee would be $32.05. For the timeframe through 2026, excuse me, there would be no CPI adjustment. Those would be the fees outside of a couple terms we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the final 2 years of the extension period would be subject to the CPI cost adjustment. So the left chart is current scope of service. Again, we talked about adding the weekly recycling piece of that and what the cost could look like. That's the right side chart. There is cost differences between the two. It's more presence in the field, it's more trips, more opportunities for people to recycle, but it's also more costly. In 2024, that proposed price is $27.19, 2025, $30.55, in 2026, $34.08. And then again, kind of the mirror of the current scope where the remaining 2 years of the extension would be CPI based for the final two. Backing up, looking at cost increases since we started the contract in 2020. So the bid price of Waste Pro in 2019 was $19.21. That's where we started the contract. And per our ordinance and per the contract, the vendor was not allowed to request for any price increases for the first 2 years. So there was no increase through 2021. And at the start of the year 2022, there was a 6.92% increase that carried the fee to $20.54. And that was CPI only. That was the indices increase there. And in 2023, our current year in the term, we're at $22.55. That was a 9.79% increase. 7.9% of that was CPI based. And if you recall, Waste Pro actually made a request due to the recycling cost impacts. Excuse me, they asked for a approximately 39-cent increase on the monthly fee. So that carried that to the $22.55 number. And so the number on the left chart here, the 2024, that is our estimation to what CPI has been trending. We've worked with budget to figure where we think that number could be. There's still a couple weeks left before that's published and we know for sure, but we think that is around 3.5% CPI. And the other fee that potentially could impact the monthly rate is the disposal fee. We did increase solid waste tipping fees at our transfer station and landfill. So in the ordinance, solid waste ordinance, it allows opportunity for the hauler to request a 10-cent per every dollar tipping fee increase. They can make that request for a fee change increase. So we were just putting those two items on there for where we think that cost could be for next year. That does not mirror what Waste Pro's proposal is. We're just saying that's what the last year of the base term, our estimation would be for CPI and disposal fee adjustment. And to the right, I apologize for the redundancy. I think when you look through the slides, it's important to see the proposal in comparison to the data that's being shown though. So again, this is Waste Pro's fees proposal on the chart there, as you can see, working through 2028 through the extension period. Difficult to compare apples to Buncombe in a lot of great ways and a lot of challenging ways to go out and pick up waste and recycling. But we did try to benchmark other counties. A lot of things impact pricing in markets. You know, how difficult is it to get out and get to the folks to collect? Competition in the market is another thing that we see that can drive, you know, price points either direction. So again, while it is challenging to benchmark, we did put some effort to see, you know, how these rates were being impacted across North Carolina. And certainly we see, like with most industries, collections is no different. We're seeing substantial cost increases. That is evident when we're talking to our counterparts in other counties. So counties such as Catawba, Guilford County, Alamance, Henderson County were some of the comparison markets that we looked at. The two highlighted rows are Buncombe County. This is our current year, the 22.55. And then we input the 25.16 so that you can see how those fees fall in line with some of our comparison markets there. And again, the two charts to the right, center and the right, those are Waste Pro's proposed fees through the extension term. Another important note here is all of these are exclusive franchise markets except for Henderson County. They do have an open market structure where there are multiple haulers that can service a given account over there or residents.
Dane, I may not be reading this right. Catawba County is listed twice.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, so, I'm sorry.
There's an option for weekly, so the upper price of $22.15 is every other week recycling.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes, and if a subscriber elects to do the weekly, that is a higher
Got it,
price.
thanks.
Thank you for that clarification, Chairman. So we tried to put some thoughts together for pros and cons with options that the board has before it. And this is not an exclusive or an extensive list, but I think it's key points to take away. When we're talking about the proposal that Waste Pros laid out to us with extending through the 2028 calendar year, some of the pros with the extension, in my mind, are, multi-year increase of service instead of all upfront cost. We're stepping to those numbers where Waste Pro feel like the rate should be providing the service in the market. No question, the existing presence of knowledge, assets, trucks, people, facilities, obviously they're very familiar with our market, and that does mean a lot. And a transparent schedule of fee increases. So those are the numbers that we see. CPI does not impact those fees until we get to the final 2 years, so we know what those fees look like for the next couple of years. When on the con side of things, you think about documented complaints that we have received, the board has received from residents, and customer satisfaction results. We've heard that feedback over the years, and at certain times we have understood that people have been frustrated with service, and also lack of competition for pricing. If we exercise this extension term that was built into the original contract, that does eliminate that competition pricing point at this time. Another option that we're talking, that the board has is for RFP, request for proposals. Thinking about this, something I want to be real clear about, it is a very lengthy process to go through. We bid things all the time, but when you think about the advertisement, receiving proposals, vetting those, making a recommendation, that's time consuming, but really when you think about the trucks and the assets that's needed to service this market, it's scale wise, it's a big market. And I know we've seen in our department lead times on vehicles, equipment. So scaling those things up, something that we definitely need to be cognizant of. So potential on the pro side of going out for soliciting bids, the potential for competitive bidding process in a new company. This would be the first opportunity for the county to solicit bids with cart collection in place. We've talked about that transition we made in 2020 was a big change. And now we've had multiple years collecting waste and recycling in carts. Now, one thing to be, again, aware of, these are Waste Pro carts. These are their assets, and that is billed through the subscriber fee. So there would have to be, if it was a new company, that would have to be a really thought out plan to how that would transition to carts for another company. Another pro is monthly cost for residents could be less. And talking about some of the key points on the cons for RFP, disruption in service if a new company took over. Big area. It's a big contract. We've got a lot of hard to get to areas, a lot of blind curves, areas. It would take a substantial amount of time for a new vendor to get their feet wet, and some challenges would arise with that. Lack of acceptable bids from service providers. I think that's based on recency bias and conversations that we hear in the markets, right? So the last time we bid it, we had one responsible bidder. We were thankful for that, but there was only one. We had another vendor that expressed partial interest, did not fully bid the process, but that's what that looked like the last time we bid. Monthly cost for residents could be more. That's the mirror opposite of on the pro side. You just don't know. So those costs could be higher, substantially higher than what we're seeing with Waste Pro's proposed fees as well. Cost increases anticipated for Waste Pro with bid. It's our understanding that in the bidding process, Waste Pro has expressed interest if we do go forward with that they would be interested in bidding. We understand that that bid price could be a lot higher than we're talking about in the extension process. So discussion points, rates, proposed fee schedule, increase over 3 years to $32.05. That's with basically the service we have now in place, weekly trash collection, every other week recycling. would consider it because we do have those numbers for adding weekly recycling collection. It's more expensive, but we have heard that feedback that, you know, there are certain folks that are interested in having weekly recycling available. Waste Pro price proposal to begin in calendar year '24. So we're talking about the extension term, but the fees actually begin to escalate above CPI, or what we estimate CPI, next year. So, you know, while we're talking about the 4 years post next year, those fees on the proposed schedule from Waste Pro start adjusting next year, stepping to get to those rates. Increases on top of the 3-year. Again, a point that I want to make sure the board understands too is disposal fee, what we talked about when tipping fees, when we go up on our fees, the ordinance allows for the hauler to request that 10 cents for every dollar that we go up. So if there is an adjustment, that, you know, the hauler could come back to the board and say, you know, we're requesting that adjustment. And recycling fee, again, we saw that last year when the recycling costs, you know, were substantially increasing. The hauler did make that request to the board specifically for the recycling costs. Also, another point that Waste Pro has requested is the current CPI indices we use in the contract is the urban clerical wage CPI. And they have requested to use the garbage and trash collection CPI moving forward. We talked with budget about that. We benchmarked, you know, the years since the contract started. They've been relatively similar. Actually, in a year or two, the garbage and trash collections being somewhat lower, but the forecast is moving forward that index would actually be higher than the one we're using currently.
And I'm just going to assume that the garbage and trash CPI is like tracking fuel costs and other metrics that are directly associated with that, as opposed to like larger economy metrics. Is that the simple version of that?
That's my understanding, yes, sir. More representative of, I guess, not as broad as the indices that we reference in the contract. It's very much more specific.
Okay.
And Commissioners, I appreciate the time. I know it's a lot of information, important discussion. So at this time, I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, Dane, so with the extensions, was it always the intent that they would be able to basically try to renegotiate? Because I was thinking with the extensions that we would be looking at the way it was in the contract, which was the CPI. So whenever we had that discussion before, and we were talking about re-upping and not going out for competitive bids, I was thinking we were doing that extension.
Yes, ma'am, Commissioner. I appreciate that question. That's where we started on the county's end with the discussion, was extension of that, CPI-based, and moving forward through the extension term. We've had multiple conversations with Waste Pro about that. So that is where we've got to this point with their proposal. So I understand that was where we started with the conversation as well.
And just in following up, Terry, just so I'm clear on this, I think I am, but just I want to make sure. So under the current agreement, Waste Pro is not required to extend the contract. They could say, thank you, but no thank you. We choose not to. And just if we couldn't get on the same page on the business terms, they're not required to continue the service under the current agreement.
Yes, sir. That's my understanding.
And when does a decision need to be made on this?
Be back 2 weeks from now for a decision. So this is the conversation, but we'll be on the agenda, correct?
Yep.
Be on the agenda on the 21st.
So we don't, Commissioners, we do not have to make any decision tonight. This is just collecting information.
Yes.
I guess just one thing, a couple other questions I would have. Do we have any data to tell us if we went to the weekly recycling, how much it might actually increase recycling? I mean, it sounds intuitively like a really good thing, right? But it is meaningfully more expensive to do it. The city's still at a weekly pickup, right? Is there any way to know? I mean, we get these requests sometimes, but is there any way if we would know it would actually really result in more recycling? Or is it just hard to tell because we just haven't done it before and there's just not data on it?
We can go look, right?
We'll look into that, Chairman. They are every other week still
Bi-weekly,
currently.
like, just like us, so.
It's not typical that you see a 96-gallon cart-based option recycling system that has weekly, because most counties, municipalities move to that with cart collection. There are some, we'll do some research and see if we can find some information for you, Chairman, on that. But it is not typical to do a weekly with carts.
Because I know it's just two of us, and we would recycle, but we don't fill up a can every 2 weeks, really.
Sure. Yeah, the recycling piece is a very important component
Yeah.
of this contract. And Waste Pro is one of the major recycles in the area, period. I mean, FY '23, it was around 5,700 tons of material was collected through the contract on that. So 11.4 million pounds of recycled material that went back to markets. It's important. The costs continue to increase there, but I think for Buncombe County, it's a key priority for us, saving landfill space and preserving those natural resources.
Dan, can you tell us a little bit more about how pickup is different in unincorporated Buncombe and more rural parts compared to some of these other market rate comparisons that are a bit more urban, and what Waste Pros had to, if anything, adapt to
Yeah,
meet that rural demand?
Great question, Commissioner. So you think about certain areas of the county where, Biltmore Lake or a place like that, well-defined subdivisions, wide roads, curb and gutter, somewhat shorter private roads to get to the main street. It's really the difference in, going out to these long gravel rural roads where a lot of cities are able to capitalize on automated everything. They got the one truck, the one person in the truck, they're rolling through, their efficiencies are high with collection. Now, there's some parts in the county, we love to see the vendor use automated, but it's hard to do because of the narrow roads, stuff that even scares you to go with your pickup truck in some of these places. That's where we're going to. So it's different trucks, it's different equipment that it's required to get out and get that. So definitely the costs are higher in certain parts of the county compared to like a municipality.
A question I have strictly from a business point of view, if we bidded this out, it would be hard if I was looking at coming in the county for me to undercut Waste Pro because they already have all the equipment here.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a good point, Commissioner. It'd be difficult to get into a market when you don't have a lot of the residential collection assets
Right.
here. There are competing interests in the market for that, but a lot of it is commercially focused.
Right.
Margins are higher on your roll-off side, your permanent front-end dumpster. Commercial side, those margins, residential's tough, and it takes certain efforts to make that happen.
And then, if you wouldn't mind, back to Commissioner Edwards' question, one of the things that we have done, if you recall in our last conversation about the contract, we added that premium service where the folks could not bring the carts down, and we actually go to their houses. Would you talk about that? Because that is one thing we've done that is additional that most counties would ever do.
Yeah, so, the premium service is more tailored to that backdoor type service where, I know of certain dirt roads that are a couple miles long. And, folks that elect to do that premium service, when we bid it, we actually put a cap. Like, what is the maximum amount that the hauler would charge a premium service to go pick that up? So a lot of people have taken advantage of that because it is more of a tailored, catered service where Waste Pro can take a smaller truck up that private driveway where there's not an economy of scale there. You're only getting a couple, 20, 30 houses, and you're having to go dump. So that premium service is available, and it's a good option for some, but it is a cost increase. So that is definitely something that people have used.
We do if we decided to make a change on the recycling frequency, that's got to be system-wide, right? It's not like some customers will I'll pay a little bit more, and others say, nah, I'm fine with every other week. It's you got to choose one or the other. Is that correct?
In my mind, yes. I think it would have to be a system.
I'm looking at Chip because Catawba allows you to choose.
They do with
They
higher
do?
price.
We actually have. Good evening. There are actually opportunities now where customers can get more than one cart if they like. Most of the customers just don't opt to incur any additional expenses. And, we like to go above and beyond. A lot of times we end up picking up debris off the ground, which is not something we're supposed to do. We're working on making sure we follow the contract.
Okay, but if a customer's like, hey, I just recycle a ton,
Mhm.
my family uses a lot of recyclable material, you can get a second
They can
recycle.
get another cart.
And how much does that, how much extra?
I don't know right offhand, but there is a fee, and it is in the contract
Okay.
that they can get another cart.
Okay, if y'all could circle back and just email that to us, that'd be great, just out of
Okay.
curiosity. Okay,
That option is available now.
that's good to know, great.
Mhm.
One other question, do y'all, Dane, do you happen to know the Catawba County, do you know if the Republic Service in Catawba County is countywide, or does Hickory do its own thing, and then, and that they're doing unincorporated Catawba?
That's a good question. Chairman, I'll have to check on that.
I'd be curious, because it is kind of a nearby county with a lot of rural.
Yes.
And it's in the mountains or foothills, so I'd be curious if that's, it seems like an interesting comp.
Yeah, I do know that some decentralized convenience sites are part of their contract. So it's the collection piece, but they also manage and operate some of their convenience sites as well. So we'll check on that.
All right. Commissioners, other questions? Again, this is not a decision we have to make tonight. It's just kind of collecting information. Any other questions? All right, gentlemen, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it. We'll be taking this back up shortly.
So Commissioners, we have one other item, but it is slated for 45 minutes. We would not finish it tonight. So we have two options. I'd like to see your preference. One, we could move it to a regular meeting tonight and add it as a manager's message, or we can pick it up at the next briefing agenda. Next. Okay.
Sounds like there's a movement for next.
I heard that. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, sorry for running long on these other items, but they were all very substantive. Okay, well, if we're not going to take that up, then we can adjourn this meeting, and we've got a few minutes before we start our meeting at 5 o'clock.